And I always felt like an outcast. I always felt that I was a burden to a lot of people and to a lot of my friend groups. Didn't feel like I was good enough. Bought a pornographic magazine from a kid in class in school, in like 7th grade. I was already struggling with a lot of self-esteem issues and, fear of rejection. And it was easy just to fall right into that because it was a good way to just kind of numb everything going on around me. When you're looking at porn every day, for a couple hours a day, that's a problem, but I didn't see it as a problem. I just thought that it was just part of my life, normal. I didn't realize the damage it was really doing to my psyche and to the way I looked at women, the way I looked at relationships, and the way I looked at sex.
Today, we are talking about an awkward and uncomfortable topic. This topic is not a popular one to discuss, and many times it is purposely hidden to keep from exposing secrets. It has led so many down the path to sin, adultery, and addiction. There is much pain, shame, and guilt around this topic. It can attach itself to a child and become shackled to that person for the rest of their life. It has been used as a false escape and an unhealthy medication for other hurts in a person's life. This topic is dark, ugly, and it is an ink blot on our society. It touches almost every person in some way, and while it offers pleasure, it almost always delivers destruction. I'm, of course, talking about the topic of pornography. Some people are never able to remove this poison from their lives, and it continues to flow through them like bad fuel through the engine of a car. However, some have had victory over this monster. But how? How can a person purge this poisonous snake from their life? This is the question that I want to ask our guest today as he tells us his life change story. So, hey, friend, why don't you introduce yourself and let the listeners know who you are?
Hey, Eric, my name's Geoff, and I have lived in Northwest Arkansas for about 32 years, and I am a recovering porn addict.
Why don't you tell the listeners where you grew up, where were you born, and tell us a little bit about your family.
Okay. Well, I was born in Little Rock, and I lived in southern Arkansas in a town called England, down in the Cotton Belt. We moved up here when I was in, I believe, 3rd grade. I was about 8 or 9. My mom and dad lived down there. My dad he was a manager of a shoe factory, and my mom was a school teacher. And I think, were married for about a year, and they had me. And then my brother came along about 3 years after me.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about growing up as a kid in that environment. Were you really close with your brother? Or did you guys fight like cats and dogs?
We spent a lot of time together, so we did fight a lot, but we had a lot of fun together too. For a while we didn't get along, but now, our relationship's really strong. So I think, it kind of ebb and flowed as we grew up.
Now, you're the older brother.
I am.
Okay. So if he was here, would he say that he felt like he was living in the shadow of Geoff or not so much?
I would think so. Yeah. It's just, I think a lot of us were different. I feel like as the older child, I was always kind of driven to be like the model of the good kid. And he kind of felt probably a little bit of the opposite. So he kind of went in a different direction where I would, kind of stay inside the lines. He would kind of be outside the lines. I think he did feel a little, I have to live up to or exceed what, Geoff's doing.
So how was your relationship with your dad? Was it good or not so much?
It was good. He wasn't when we lived down in southern Arkansas, he was around a lot more. When we moved up here, he opened up a restaurant, and he spent a lot of time working. 80, 90 hours a week. So that relationship was a little strained. He wasn't around. He missed a lot of stuff because he was working. But then once he got out of the restaurant business and got into the ministry, he was around a lot more. So that relationship really grew a lot. And he passed away, I believe, 7 years ago. And at that point, we were really close.
So how was your relationship with your mother then? Since he was gone, were you close to her? Or
We've always been pretty close. She's been doing recovery through Al-Anon for probably 20 years, probably longer than that. She's been really involved in that. So, growing up, we had a lot of, there was a lot of, because she was the only caregiver and she was the disciplinarian, and there was a lot of pushback, and there wasn't a lot, we didn't get along a lot. And she wasn't the happiest person. She was mad at my dad. She was mad about the situation. She struggled with a lot of stuff. So, she kind of put a lot of that on us, and she learned that from her parents because they kind of put that stuff on her too. So, there was a long time where the relationship was kind of strained.
So you mentioned Al-Anon, which some of the listeners may not know what that means. So why don't you explain what that is and how that was, or how your mom struggled with what she struggled with?
Well, Al-Anon is a recovery group for children, parents, siblings, or friends, family of addicts. And my brother had some drug and alcohol issues, and my mother had some, just anger issues and a lot of stuff that she dealt with from childhood that, kind of just was driving the way she acted with us and the way she treated us. And, so that's kind of what she went to that for was, she needed some help to process his addictions, but she also needed help processing a lot of the other baggage and, hurts and habits and hangups that she had developed over, the majority of her life. Once she got into recovery and started, making changes in her life, our relationship started getting really good.
So what was it like in school for Geoff? Were you an outgoing person? Were you a rule follower, or were you a rebel? Tell us a little bit about your school experience.
Well, when I was, before we moved up here, I was kind of a little bit of a rebel. I seemed to get in trouble a lot. My mouth would get me in a lot of trouble, and that continued on. A lot of people have a filter. Sometimes mine doesn't work properly. I think a good example, when I was in first grade, I dropped the F-bomb in class, and it was a little bit different time down in southern Arkansas. They believed in corporal punishment. So I do remember, some my mouth getting me in trouble. When we moved up here, the fact that we moved was difficult. And then the fact that, things weren't the same as they were. Money was tight. Instead of being a, middle-class family, we moved kind of down into a poorer kind of family. And we lived in a more upscale area of Fayetteville. And I always felt like an outcast. So my outgoingness kind of started to turn into the opposite of, coming back to myself and, spending a lot of time alone. So that was, kind of difficult. So school was difficult because, I always felt that I was a burden to a lot of people and to a lot of my friend groups, and just didn't feel like I was good enough. And, there were some things that happened that kind of drove home those feelings. And a good example would be one of my earliest kind of hurts was I asked a girl out one time in school, and this was back before the internet and cell phones, where you had to actually call somebody at their house and, you talk to them on the phone. And then the next day at school, she basically told everybody in the whole class that I called her and basically told me I was worthless and she'd never date somebody like that. And that really kind of set a precedent for me being scared of putting myself out there in a lot of areas. And I was already kind of feeling that way, but that kind of was one of those nails that just kind of drove home that, you're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough for, for people to appreciate you as a person. And that's something I've struggled with, and I still kind of struggle with today. So
sounds like that kind of spoke to your identity and who you thought you were, and sometimes rejection can make us feel that way.
Exactly.
So did you have any God moments? You mentioned faith earlier. Were your parents Christians? Did you guys go to church regularly? And when did you have a God moment in your life as a child, or maybe it wasn't as a child? I don't know.
Some of my fondest memories as a kid were going to church. My dad would go, my mom would go. She was in the choir. She was really active, and she still is today. She spends a lot of time doing that. I'd say, God has always been a part of my life. I think probably when I was 12 or 13 is when I, accepted Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior.
Did you see your mom and dad give each other a lot of affection? I mean, was it obvious that they loved each other, or how did that go?
It was, but they didn't spend a lot of time together because they were both working a lot, but they loved each other. I mean, I could tell. And, physical affection is really not something that was big in our family. My mom, she's a hugger, but my dad was, he's kind of stay out of my bubble. And I'm kind of the same way. Not as much now, but, for a long time I was. So, my brother's the same way. Getting a hug out of him is difficult. My mom's been struggling with that for years. But, there was love, but there wasn't a lot of physical affection shown.
So what did you do after high school? Did you go directly into the workforce or did you go to college?
Well, I attempted to go to college. One of the things I struggle with is kind of knowing what I want to do with myself. And I knew I wanted to go to college. I thought that was what I needed to do. So my grades were decent enough. I got into the University of Arkansas. And then basically I had no direction. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like, well, I'll be a history major. I like history a lot, war history and stuff like that. I'll do that, but being a teacher didn't seem like something I wanted to do. So I really didn't have a direction. So I made it the first year. I passed one class my first semester, and that was freshman orientation. Eventually I got kicked out for grades. They, academically suspended me for a little bit. I went into the workforce, started working. I was stocking shelves at a Walmart and then going to school part-time. And then I eventually got back into school, didn't really do too good on grades, got kicked out again, went back to going part-time and working full-time. And eventually after, 3 or 4 years of, I just kind of gave up on it and just started working.
So you mentioned in your introduction that you are a porn addict. Mm-hmm. So you didn't mention yet anything happening as a youth. Did it start whenever you were young or did that come later?
It started when I was probably, I'd say 11, 12. I started just honestly I was attracted to females and, I remember, underwear ads were kind of like the thing that kind of started that thing. But instead of just looking at them, I'd cut them out of magazines and I'd save them, which was weird. I vaguely remember being exposed to pornography when I was really young, in a neighborhood, like a little clubhouse kind of deal, in a neighborhood, and that's in somebody's backyard. I remember seeing pornography for the first time, but the first time I was actually, exposed to it, I bought a pornographic magazine from a kid in class in school, in like 7th grade. And then at that point, I was already struggling with, a lot of self-esteem issues and, fear of rejection and from a lot of, being rejected. So it was easy just to fall right into that because, there was no in that. And that, I found a lot of comfort in that, because it was a good way to just kind of numb everything going on around me. I spent a lot of time and money on that. And, I didn't think it was a problem. I just thought it was what men do. And I didn't realize the damage it was really doing to my psyche and to the way I looked at women, the way I looked at relationships, and the way I looked at sex. I'm still working to kind of reprogram the damage that it's done, even, 40 years later, 30 years later.
So give me a little bit of context. So whenever you got out of high school, you said you went to college for about a year or so, and then you dropped out and went into the workforce. Were you working, what was did the pornography become, where you're using it more regularly, or when did you start realizing, gosh, this is a problem in my life?
I was probably in my 30s when I started, probably later, mid 30s when I started realizing it was a problem. I just, I was in there as something that it was something that I just did. Everybody I knew, a lot of the guys I knew in high school, they looked at porn, everybody a lot of people I knew did it. I just didn't think it was out of the normal. And especially with society today, it's everywhere. Sex is everywhere. And, I just thought that it was just normal that, that's what, men do is look at porn. But, when you're looking at porn every day, for a couple hours a day, that's a problem. But I didn't see it as a problem. I just thought that it was just part of my life, normal.
So where was God in all this? Because you said you accepted Christ when you were 13. So as you were becoming an adult and then you get into the workforce, now you just said, well, it was just normal. It was just, I thought this was what everybody was doing. Were you going to church? Did you have any indicator that, well, maybe not everybody does it and maybe I shouldn't be doing it? Where was the moral compass there?
Well, once I got out of high school and moved off on my own, God was there, but he wasn't there. I pretty much put my relationship with God on the back burner. I didn't go to church. I just basically did what I wanted to do. And that was, chase after women. And, whenever that didn't work, porn was what I used to, medicate that disappointment. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time doing that, and God was there, but he just, I always said I believe in God, but I ignored the fact that what I was doing was sinful. I just did it. And, he was there, but I wasn't listening to anything he said. And it took a long time for me to finally get to that point where I started to listen.
Well, let me ask you this. When did things start turning, and walk me through the events of that? I mean, was there a moment in time that you said, okay, this is wrong and I need to stop doing this. I need help. I mean, to walk me through that in your life.
So I got into the workforce and I worked some odd jobs. I worked for the University of Arkansas for about 5 years, but I always wanted to be a police officer, and that was something I really wanted to do. Some of my earliest memories of, that would be fun. So I finally got into law enforcement when I was in my mid-20s, and I did that. I was, worked for a couple agencies, and I got to a point, I just gotten out of a really bad relationship, two actually really bad relationships kind of stacked on top of each other. And basically, I was just I was at a low. I was at an extreme low. I had no self-confidence. I was miserable. And I remember it clearly. One of my friends was, another police officer friend of mine. We talked a lot about, because he was struggling with some mental health issues also. And I remember one night he called me and he's like, "Hey man, I'm going back to school." And I was like, "Cool. Where are you going back to school?" He's like, "I'm going to go to John Brown University. They've got a, degree completion program. You can get it done in 18 months. And I was like, that's interesting. So, I was just at a broken point in my life. I needed something. And I knew, now I look back at it, and I know God knows I needed something to kind of shake me loose and push me in the right direction. So, I was like, it just kind of started the wheels turning in my head. And so, I decided I'm going to do it. That's something I was always disappointed in myself, that I never completed school in the first place. And I was looking for a change because I felt stuck. My personal life was in shambles. My work life wasn't really that great at that point because a lot of my personal issues had kind of bled into my work. And, I didn't feel like I felt stuck. So, I took this opportunity as an opportunity, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I signed up the next week and I went to school, and, that really started kind of rekindle my relationship with God and started kind of pushing me to where I'm at today. Through that, I was able to get go back to school. I got my bachelor's degree and then ended up going and getting my master's degree. And that pushed me to look outside of, law enforcement's been fun, but I need something else in my life. What am I going to do now? And God gave me an opportunity to go work for the company I work for now. And, during this time, my relationship got better and better with God, but I was still using porn as an escape because I just, didn't know better. And I was, at this point, my anxiety and depression issues had really started to spiral out of control also. And I don't think I've told you about that, but I struggled a lot with that. And a lot of it was, relationship based. Those relationships that had ended badly had really kind of really hurt and really kind of pushed me to isolate myself. So, I was broken and I needed something to kind of shake me loose. So that moved me in the right direction.
So you mentioned you were broken and that your personal life was in shambles. Mm-hmm. And so you haven't mentioned any events or anything that maybe caused that. You mentioned some broken relationships and so forth. So maybe give me what led you to that path of being broken? Where it led you to the conclusion that, hey, my life is in shambles? Was it the personal relationships, or tell me about that?
I think a lot of it is the personal relationships because, those hurtful relationships that ended badly, because I always felt that if I could find, a girl and, find a happy relationship and get married, I wouldn't need pornography to make it through the day. I wouldn't need that as, something to support my, my lustful needs and my, sexual wants, because marriage is, you're married, you don't have to worry about that stuff. I can turn that off once I'm married. But I was also so scared of being rejected because I had been rejected. And most of the relationships that I had started with were all based on sex. They weren't really based on finding somebody that I was compatible with and enjoyed spending time with. It was basically, well, they're pretty and they're interested. That's all I need, and then, these relationships were built on terrible ground and they'd fall apart. And, the people that I was going after were broken. I was broken. And the whole saying, broken people hurt broken people. I mean, it was just that endless cycle. So basically, I'd have these, relationship. It wouldn't last long, or it'd last long and then fall apart, and or I'd start feeling that they weren't the right person. So I'd try to find ways out of it. And eventually I just got to the point where it was easier for me to hurt them before they hurt me. So most of our relationships were, get in, get what I wanted out of it, and then break it off before they could, hurt me again, because I was just so scared of being hurt. And then once that was over, I would go into an isolation phase. And I would basically isolate myself with pornography and just push away from everything because I was scared to get back into that again. And sometimes those isolations would last a year, 2 years before I was ready to go back out there, but it just kept on doing the same cycle and it wouldn't change. And, I think what finally made me realize that I needed to change was the last relationship I was in. And this has been over 3 years ago. And this was actually, it ended a year before I started really focusing on recovery. But, it was so toxic because it was basically, I met this woman and we jumped into bed together the first time we ever met in person. That's not healthy. And as I look back on it, it was crazy. And, she was in a really bad spot. I was in a bad spot. I was not a happy person. I was 80 something pounds heavier than I am now. I was not exercising. I couldn't sleep at night. I was miserable, and I spent most of my time isolated at home. And then I got into this relationship and it was so toxic. And just once I was able to end that relationship, I had to physically push her out of my door to get her to leave. That's how much that it was so broken. And that really kind of made me realize, you got some things you need to fix. You got some problems you need to address, but I didn't know how to do that. And I had been to Celebrate Recovery a little bit before I met her. But I knew I had some, I was like, I could probably stop looking at porn, but I wasn't ready to do that yet. I still was in my delusion about that. But, after that relationship, I isolated from the world basically for about a year. I didn't really talk to my friends. I didn't really do anything. Most of the time me leaving the house was going to get food. That was about it, or the things I needed to survive. The rest of the time I was sitting there watching TV or sleeping because I was just so, broken or just scared of the world, and just, that I needed a change. And I think that final relationship was what kind of pushed me in the right direction. But it took me another year after that to finally say, hey, I really need to make these changes. And, God works in mysterious ways. And, one of my friends who was in Celebrate Recovery said, hey man, my step-study group's graduating. And I was like, he's like, you need to come. And then I went, and, I felt like it was a place I needed to be because I needed something. I needed a change. And, I was resistant to that change for, I think for like 4 months I was going, but I wasn't really going. I was just kind of showing up because I felt pulled to be there, but I wasn't ready yet to really give in to changing. But finally God gave me an opportunity, he made me not want to be that same person again. And then after that, it was off to the races.
So describe to me the change. What did you do to start creating change in your life?
Well, I think for me, the first change I made was stop looking at pornography and to get that out of my life. But that was so ingrained in my life. It was something that I couldn't do on my own. And God helped me with this. And at the time, I didn't realize he was doing it. And I was already kind of in that recovery mode. I wasn't in a step study yet, but I was already, I was going to the meetings, and, I wasn't going to open share or anything like that. I was just going to the service, kind of dipping my toes in it. But, God opened that door, and I just felt the pull to jump in and actually surrender and say, I'm done trying to fix my life and do everything on my own. I'm giving you the wheel now. You've already showed me that, you can open these doors. I just got to accept that you're giving me an out. And I took that out. I think what it came down to is I wanted to be the best version of myself. And I knew that I couldn't do that if I had porn weighing me down. And so I made the decision to stop doing it. And it's been a struggle. I still struggle with the internal sobriety a lot, the lustful thoughts and stuff like that. But externally, I was able to cut that out of my life. And going through a step study was amazing. I met, My sponsor has been really helpful. He's kind of pushed me to jump into kind of a leadership role, and being able to to see other guys that struggle and see that it's possible to be happy without those things that you thought you needed to be happy. I thought I needed, a sexual relationship to be happy or pornography to be happy, and I don't. As long as I have God in my life and I'm happy with who I am and I'm continuously working on myself, it's easy for me to be happy. All that other stuff will fall into place if I just trust that God will do what he needs to do for my life when it needs to be done. And that was something that for a long time I could not wrap my brain around. I just thought that I have to control everything. But once I kind of gave up a little bit and just surrendered, things have just kind of fallen into place on their own. And it's amazing because I can look back on it and be like, wow, if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gotten to this point. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have gotten to this point. Kind of going back to the school thing. If I had gone back to school, I wouldn't end up where I'm at for work. I wouldn't have met my friend Matt, who was sitting in the desk next to me that had been going to Celebrate Recovery. I wouldn't, it's amazing how those little corrections in life that you don't think are important have such a big impact down the road. And it's amazing what God can do.
So let me ask you, how long have you been sober from pornography?
I celebrated 2 years in June.
Man, that is fantastic. It's amazing. So God has obviously made a change in your life. How do you stay sober? How do you continue to reject the lies from the enemy? What would you say is the key to your success?
Well, I found a lot of keys, but I think the main important key is, relying on God. I think if God wasn't part of the equation, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And a lot of that is, I try to focus on daily to quiet time. That's, helps a lot. Now that I've started focusing on being the best version of myself, I've been able to, make a lot of positive changes that have benefited my health, and my health is better. So I sleep better. My anxiety is controlled. I'm no longer on medication for that. I deal with that. I deal with it, but I know how to process it. And I know that it's a small little blip, and it's just a hurdle I have to get over with. But if I don't have God in my life, then I can't get over those hurdles. And I rely on him a lot, and a lot of this is a daily prayer. And just, if I'm feeling triggered, if I'm feeling, if I'm having, lustful thoughts, immediately I go to him, and it's just not even, basically it's, say, hey God, man, I'm struggling. If I keep that connection, it's a lot easier for me not to fall back into my old habits and let those things creep back in. I think for me, I could go back to pornography in a heartbeat if I wanted to. So I have to monitor what I watch. I think for me, my biggest struggle is that internal sobriety of seeing, lustful thoughts. And I struggle with that a lot, but I don't act on those because I know that if I do, I'm going to fall back into those old patterns, and I don't want to go down that road again because this is not who I am. And another way that I've really helped is just being involved through Celebrate Recovery is awesome. I've really had an opportunity to jump into the leadership kind of areas, but I also have people that rely on me to stay sober also. And I want to do that for them because I feel like God's helping me in their lives, and I don't want that to stop. I want to continue to do that.
So how important is community?
I think it's extremely important. You have to have people to rely on, because if you don't, who are you going to turn to? Sometimes you just need somebody you can say, hey man, I need somebody to talk to, or you got to be able to get that stuff out. I've got so many people that, if I'm struggling, they're a phone call away, and I know that. And I take comfort in knowing that I'm not alone in the process. Don't feel like you have to go at it alone, because if you go at it alone, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you go at it with God and you find some people that you can rely on to help get you through that storm, the sky's the limit.
Thanks, Geoff, for sharing your story with us today. Hey, if you are listening today and this topic of pornography has brought up some bad feelings for you, maybe someone that you love has recently been caught in this addiction, or maybe even you struggle with this issue. The enemy wants you to believe that it's just normal behavior and that there is really no problem at all. Maybe you realize that there is a problem, but but you haven't been able to fix it on your own and you feel there is no hope for recovery. That's a lie. I personally have had 13 years of sobriety over pornography. However, I had to admit that I had a problem. I had to allow God into this area of my life and allow Him to take me through a process of healing. Jesus said in Mark 2:17, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think that they are righteous, but those who know that they are sinners. If you are struggling with this issue, I want to encourage you to step out of denial and allow God to change you. Change is possible. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.